I once believed motherhood was a bond no tragedy could unravel, until smoke swallowed my home and my daughter swallowed her conscience. With nothing but ashes and aching joints, I knocked on her door expecting refuge. Instead, I was told I was an extra mouth, dismissed like a stranger. Nights in the car hardened me. Cold seats and colder memories taught me a brutal truth. Love without respect becomes charity, and charity without compassion is cruelty. When insurance money arrived, I didn't chase sympathy. I bought something stronger, power. And for the first time, she would feel what abandonment truly costs. My name is Henrietta Cole. I'm 67, and I never imagined the life I built for decades would turn to ash in a single evening. I stood barefoot on the curb, watching flames swallow memories, photo albums, handmade quilts, letters from my mother, and the quiet comfort of familiarity. Neighbors watched from a distance, whispering sympathy I couldn't hear. Firefighters worked without rest, but the outcome was clear. Nothing could be saved. As smoke billowed into the night sky, it took more than possessions, it took certainty. I felt small, fragile, and suddenly homeless. Yet beneath the shock, there was a flicker of stubborn hope. Surely family would help in crisis. She stood frozen, not from heat, but from the cold realization that everything she once depended on no longer existed. The crackling wood sounded like memories breaking. The fire didn't just destroy walls, it devoured her sense of safety. While officials spoke in rehearsed sympathy and handed out pamphlets she barely processed, she stared at the collapsing roof and thought about birthday parties once held in that living room and holidays prepared in that kitchen. It wasn't the loss of belongings that hurt most, it was losing the only place where she never felt like a burden. As the flames quieted and smoke settled, one terrifying truth lingered: there was nowhere to go. She clutched her phone with trembling hands, believing a daughter would understand in a way strangers couldn't. Her voice cracked as she explained the fire, expecting shock or urgency. Instead, there was silence, followed by an impatient sigh. Excuses spilled, poor timing, inconvenience, the husband's discomfort. There was no compassion, only calculation. The call ended without comfort, leaving her staring at her reflection in the dark window of a fire truck. She replayed the conversation, searching for warmth she didn't receive. At that moment, she still hoped misunderstanding played a role, not cruelty. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Family, she realized, might not save her. When she arrived at their doorstep, suitcase in hand, the hostility was immediate. His crossed arms, narrowed eyes, and stiff posture said everything words didn't. He didn't ask if she was safe or injured. Instead, he spoke of bills, space, and inconvenience, reducing her tragedy to logistics. His tone implied she was irresponsible, that her misfortune was somehow her fault. She tried to reassure him she needed only a short stay, but reasoning bounced off pride. His resentment was louder than her plea, and while her daughter stood behind him, she stayed silent. That silence hurt more than his insults. It meant agreement. The car seat became her bed, the steering wheel her headboard, and the glove compartment her storage. The cold seeped into her bones, and streetlights became her only guardians. She wrapped herself in a blanket that still smelled faintly of smoke, trying to ignore the ache in her back and the humiliation in her chest. She forced herself to believe it was temporary, a night or two, nothing more. But as engines hummed around her and people passed without noticing, she realized how invisible homelessness can feel. The car windows fogged with her breath and tears blurred her vision. She wasn't just without a home, she was without refuge. She swallowed pride and knocked on doors, not literal ones but metaphorical. Shelters, old acquaintances, church groups, neighbors. She explained her situation so many times the words began to taste like shame. Some offered sympathy but no space. Others pretended to care but directed her to bureaucratic waiting lists. Kindness existed, but inconsistency made it unreliable. Nights in the car stretched into weeks and exhaustion settled into her bones. Every rejection chipped away at the belief that compassion was instinctive. She learned the heartbreaking truth: society romanticizes helping until it's inconvenient, and she was the face of inconvenience. Still, she endured. Just when despair began turning into resignation, the call came. Her insurance claim, slow, complicated, and uncertain, was finally approved. The relief wasn't joy, it was oxygen. She had resources again, not pity. She wouldn't have to beg, rely, or endure lectures about being a burden. The payout represented more than money, it represented independence. And with it came a shift in mindset. She no longer wanted a couch to sleep on. She wanted a roof she could call hers. The betrayal that once crushed her now fueled determination. She realized she could rebuild, but not with forgiveness, with leverage. She returned to the doorstep one last time, clinging to the belief that a face-to-face plea might stir compassion. Instead, the door opened just wide enough for her daughter to speak, coldly, efficiently, and without remorse. She didn't ask if the nights in the car were unbearable or if injuries from the fire still lingered. She simply said her husband didn't want extra mouths to feed, as if her own mother were livestock, not family. The phrase struck harder than the rejection itself. It reduced her from parent to liability, from loved one to expense. As the door shut with mechanical finality, she realized this wasn't misunderstanding. It was a choice, a deliberate choice to discard her. The next morning, she returned to speak calmly, hoping last night's cruelty had been spoken in anger. Instead, she found the locks changed. No chance for conversation, no attempt at explanation. The new deadbolt glittered like a symbol of exile. That locked door represented more than property, it represented severed ties. She wasn't just barred from shelter. She was barred from the family she once nurtured. Standing on the porch, she stared through the window at people she no longer recognized. Their laughter carried on inside, indifferent to the woman outside, shivering in humiliation. The message was unmistakable. Her presence, her need, her existence were now inconveniences. One evening, she approached hoping to retrieve sentimental items, old photographs, handmade blankets, keepsakes untouched by the fire. Instead, she found a cardboard box sitting on the porch in the rain. Inside, a few clothes and items tossed carelessly, as though clearing clutter rather than returning memories. Belongings that survived flames were now drenched by indifference. There was no note, no knock on the window, just residue of rejection. She stared at the soggy box and realized she was not considered worthy of respect, not even enough for dignity in the discard. What wasn't burned was now thrown away, and the emotional message was clear. She didn't belong here anymore, not even in memory. Word travels faster than compassion. Whispers trickled through the neighborhood, speculation, exaggeration, and judgment. To some, she was careless for losing her home. To others, she was dramatic for seeking help. A few even suggested she exaggerated the fire for sympathy. Cars slowed when driving past her parked car, eyes lingering too long. People she once greeted with holiday cookies now pretended not to recognize her. Shame became a coat she couldn't remove. She realized society doesn't need truth, it needs a story. And her story, reshaped by gossip, painted her not as a survivor, but as a nuisance. She felt smaller with each glance. He relished the power imbalance. Whenever she approached the house, he stepped outside, not to help but to remind her of her place. He spoke of rising costs and inflation, as if economics justified cruelty. He made sarcastic comments about her living in the car, calling it minimalist living and suggesting she should be proud of independence. The smirk on his face revealed enjoyment, not discomfort. He didn't just want her gone, he wanted her ashamed. His words stripped away the last remnants of familial respect. She realized this wasn't just her daughter's choice, it was a joint cruelty. They were unified in rejection. There's a distinct moment when denial dissolves and truth settles like concrete. That moment came as she sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, listening to the rain drum against the roof. She replayed every excuse she had made for them: stress, miscommunication, pressure. But excuses shattered beneath evidence. They didn't want her temporarily gone. They wanted her permanently gone. No one was coming to rescue her. Not family, not friends, not community. The weight of abandonment was suffocating. Yet beneath the grief, something hardened. If she was alone, truly alone, then she no longer owed them anything. Humiliation reached its boiling point. She realized begging for humanity from people who refused to give it was self-inflicted pain. As she sat in the darkness of her car, she made a silent, unwavering vow. She would never ask them for shelter, compassion, or validation again. That vow didn't erase the hurt, but it redirected it. She transformed shame into resolve. She would rebuild not as a supplicant, but as an equal. No more pleading. No more believing blood guarantees loyalty. She began planning, not vengeance, but independence. And the spark of determination that flickered within her that night would soon ignite. With the insurance payout secured, she didn't rush into spending. She took a seat in the public library, surrounded by computers and city records, determined to turn tragedy into strategy. She typed in her daughter's address, not out of spite but curiosity. What she discovered sparked interest. The property wasn't owned by her daughter or son-in-law. It belonged to an aging landlord struggling with multiple mortgages. Public documents showed late payments, liens, and impending foreclosure. For the first time in weeks, she felt a control shift, not dramatically but quietly. She wasn't just a homeless mother anymore. She was a woman with information. And information is power. She dug deeper, tracing financial notices and foreclosure warnings. The landlord wasn't malicious, he was drowning. Multiple properties, rising interest rates, and legal notices proved he was desperate to sell before losing everything. His misfortune created a window, one that aligned with her opportunity. She realized her daughter's home wasn't secure. It was vulnerable. And not because of her, but because of the people who thought themselves untouchable. The irony was poetic. While they treated her as expendable, their own stability balanced on the edge. The house they believed they owned, emotionally if not legally, was slipping out of someone else's grasp. She knew exactly where to step next. She contacted the landlord through an attorney, preferring anonymity. There was no need for drama or confrontation, not yet. The landlord, weary and desperate, didn't ask questions. He cared about numbers, not tenants. She negotiated respectfully, offering a price that allowed him to clear debts and avoid foreclosure. It wasn't charity, it was business. And for the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't felt since the fire: agency. She made decisions, signed papers, and directed her future. All while her daughter and son-in-law remained blissfully unaware. She didn't shout her progress to the world. She let silence do the work. Silence just like they had given her. When the final paperwork was signed, she didn't feel vindication. She felt relieved. The house that once represented rejection was now a symbol of transformation. The county clerk stamped the documents, and with one motion, ownership shifted. She didn't need applause or validation. She needed the deed. It was surreal, standing outside the very house she had been exiled from, knowing she now owned it. She didn't knock, she didn't announce. She simply stood on the sidewalk, watching the lights flicker through windows, imagining the moment they would learn the truth. She wasn't plotting revenge. She was reclaiming dignity. She drafted the notice with precise language, formal, professional, and free of emotion. The paper explained the change in ownership and requested updated tenant information. It wasn't threatening, it was administrative. She printed it on crisp white paper, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it to the very house where she once sought refuge. The irony felt heavy but satisfying. This wasn't a vindictive letter. It was a statement. She no longer begged at that door. She owned the building behind it. And with that ownership came the right to decide terms she intended to enforce, not negotiate away through guilt or tears. Her daughter and son-in-law had long boasted about comfort, convenience, and entitlement. They took pride in their spacious rooms and remodeled kitchen. So when she restructured the rent, she didn't inflate it blindly. She researched market value, property tax increases, and maintenance fees. The new rent wasn't cruelty, it was realism. It exposed how fragile their comfort truly was. The letter outlined expectations, timelines, and consequences clearly. She didn't hide behind emotion or revenge. She stood on legality. The terms were strict but justified, and they were about to learn that treating someone as disposable doesn't make them powerless. Before delivering the notice, she ensured every measure was legally sound. She consulted an attorney to verify eviction procedures, tenant rights, and financial obligations. She didn't want a dramatic confrontation that could backfire. She wanted certainty. With legal backing, she could proceed without fear, something she hadn't felt since the fire. She realized revenge based on anger is reckless, but justice based on law is unshakable. The woman once sleeping in her car now held leverage backed by the court itself. And soon, the ones who shut their door on her would learn what it meant to face a door they couldn't control. The moment the notice arrived, confusion painted their faces. They assumed it was routine paperwork from their landlord, until the signature at the bottom revealed a different name. Shock rippled through the household as reality sank in. They were no longer tenants of a distant landlord, but of the very woman they discarded. The daughter's voice cracked, not with guilt but disbelief, as she reread the document, hoping it was a mistake. The man who mocked homelessness now found himself under the authority of the person he once refused shelter. She didn't show up to explain. She didn't need to. The deed did the speaking. And silence, once their weapon, now became her shield. Rage erupted. They stormed through rooms, shouting accusations of manipulation and betrayal, refusing to accept responsibility. They insisted she must have tricked someone, forged something, or schemed her way into ownership. Excuses flew faster than accountability, claiming timing was unfair, the fire irrelevant, and her suffering exaggerated. Their denial wasn't rooted in confusion. It was rooted in arrogance. They couldn't fathom the idea that someone they considered inferior, an extra mouth, had acquired the very house they took for granted. The daughter paced, fists clenched, unable to reconcile entitlement with reality. And beneath her fury was something far more revealing: fear. He called lawyers, convinced he could reverse the situation with bluster and money he didn't have. He demanded loopholes, claimed fraud, and insisted she must have violated some imaginary clause. But each attorney told him the same thing: she followed the law, she acted within her rights. The sale was legitimate, the deed was valid. His threats softened into desperation as legal jargon offered no lifeline. He realized the power he once held, social, financial, and emotional, had evaporated. He wasn't dealing with a vulnerable woman seeking pity. He was confronting a landlord with contracts and authority. For once, words couldn't bully her. Rumors spread, but this time the narrative changed. Neighbors who whispered about her homelessness now whispered about her resilience. The same community that once judged her began questioning the daughter's morality. Stories surfaced: cold refusals, mocking comments, and door slamming. Sympathy migrated. People who once crossed the street to avoid eye contact now approached to offer support. daughter and her husband, once admired for their perceived success, became symbols of selfishness. And she, once invisible in a car, became proof that dignity can rise from ashes. It wasn't revenge, it was reputation correcting itself. Old neighbors and acquaintances began sharing messages, recordings, and screenshots, moments when the couple mocked her situation or dismissed her needs. A video surfaced of the son-in-law bragging about refusing to help. Text messages showed the daughter's cold replies. The evidence spread quickly through social circles and online groups. The couple's polished image cracked under the weight of their own words. They tried to defend themselves, but excuses collapsed in the face of their documented cruelty. Their shame became public, not because she exposed them, but because they exposed themselves. The world they once impressed now recoiled. Eventually, pride surrendered, not to remorse, but to fear. The daughter approached, not with humility, but urgency. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't acknowledge the pain she caused. She only asked for leniency, emphasizing inconvenience, finances, and reputation. Her plea was transactional, not emotional. She sought mercy without accountability. She wanted comfort, not reconciliation. And as she stood there, voice trembling, not with guilt but entitlement, it became clear she was not seeking forgiveness. She was seeking escape. The woman she once discarded listened without anger or satisfaction. She simply measured the value of their words and found them empty. She didn't threaten eviction impulsively. She prepared it legally, methodically, and without malice. The notice wasn't a weapon, it was a consequence. It demonstrated that compassion isn't owed to those who weaponize it. The couple's panic deepened as they realized they were no longer in control of their living situation. They faced the reality of adulthood without entitlement. The woman who slept in her car now determined the roof above their heads. They weren't being punished for refusing help, they were facing the aftermath of cruelty. And the possibility of eviction was no longer hypothetical. It was real, it was earned. Because what happened next wasn't forgiveness, it was justice. Like I'm asking you to subscribe, you can feel the climax coming. When the dispute reached the courthouse, she didn't tremble. She arrived with documentation, receipts, recorded communication, and a clear paper trail proving she had followed every legal requirement. The couple arrived overwhelmed, armed with accusations instead of evidence. Their entitlement clashed with the rigid neutrality of law. The judge saw not a scheming landlord, but a woman who had purchased a property legally and served notices correctly. Their claims of manipulation dissolved under scrutiny. The ruling was simple. She held full rights as landlord, and her tenants were obligated to comply. Unlike the emotional battlefield they expected, the court relied on facts. Justice didn't roar, it spoke quietly and decisively. Reality settled in slowly. Triple rent wasn't revenge, it was market value, backed by law. Their savings drained faster than expected, luxuries vanished, and arguments multiplied. They tried budgeting, cutting expenses, and seeking help from friends, but the social circle that once admired them kept its distance. The house they once bragged about became an anchor they could no longer afford. Pride couldn't pay bills, and entitlement couldn't negotiate new terms. Eventually, they were forced to seek smaller housing, not because she evicted them, but because they couldn't sustain the lifestyle they once flaunted. Downsizing wasn't humiliation. It was a recalibration. A lesson in reality, taught by consequences, not cruelty. Once the full story spread, her sleeping in a car, their rejection, and the documented insults, the social tide shifted. Invitations faded. Neighborhood groups removed them quietly. Parents avoided them at school events. Friends who once praised their success no longer wanted association. The couple found themselves isolated, not through rumor, but through undeniable truth. The very community they relied on for validation now viewed them through a different lens, selfishness exposed. Isolation became their consequence, not orchestrated by her, but by their own actions. Unlike her weeks in a car, their downfall was cushioned with a roof, but empty of respect. The son-in-law's professional life took the hardest hit. Clients saw leaked messages mocking homelessness and refusing to help families. For a man who built his career on public charm and trust, the contradiction was fatal. Contracts were canceled, partnerships dissolved. He tried rebranding, apologizing publicly, even blaming stress, but authenticity mattered. And the more he fought to restore credibility, the more obvious the hypocrisy looked. His downfall wasn't theatrical. It was administrative. Emails of withdrawal, contracts terminated, meetings canceled. Reputation, once his weapon, became his weakness. He learned too late that cruelty doesn't stay private. It echoes. Unlike her husband's professional fallout, the daughter's consequence was social and emotional. People she once considered allies confronted her, not violently but firmly. Former friends asked how a woman could turn away her own mother after a fire. Others questioned her empathy, her values, and her humanity. She tried defending herself, insisting stress clouded judgment, but excuses rang hollow. She didn't face physical hardship, she faced judgment. And for someone who valued image above integrity, that was punishment enough. She realized too late that compassion cannot be faked and cruelty cannot be erased by justifying intentions. She didn't use rent money to seek vengeance or luxury. She invested in something she wished she'd received: dignity. She funded a small local shelter for seniors displaced by crisis, people like her who needed temporary refuge without judgment. It wasn't charity born from guilt, it was empowerment born from experience. The shelter offered beds, meals, and emotional support, proving compassion could survive even when family fails. She didn't brag about her efforts or weaponize them for validation. She built quietly, letting actions speak louder than bitterness. Her suffering became a foundation, not a scar. Her victory wasn't revenge, it was evolution. She didn't seek her daughter's approval, nor did she relish their downfall. Instead, she used her restored stability to uplift people cast aside like she once was. She understood that true power isn't in making others kneel, but in refusing to kneel yourself. The woman who slept in a car now held keys, not just to a building, but to choices. She chose compassion where she received cruelty. She chose to build instead of break. And her final triumph wasn't seeing her daughter struggle, it was knowing she no longer needed her. The strength she rebuilt was hers alone.